I'm Joe Cirincione. I'm president of Ploughshares Fund. I eliminate nuclear weapons. Well, I grew up in the 1950s, so we did duck and cover drills. We had the siren going off every Saturday at noon in the New Haven Green. We had our AM radios in our cars. That's the only radios people had back then, being tested for the civil defense system. So this was a part of my life. I think the first magazine article I ever really read was the serialization of Failsafe in the Saturday Evening Post, which was just a horrifying idea that one bomb could destroy an entire city and that we had enough weapons to destroy every city, in fact, the whole world. So from a very early age, I was very conscious of the dangers that nuclear weapons represented, and that's all it was. Nuclear weapons didn't represent security to us. They didn't represent strength. This was a danger, the existential threat to our country, to the planet. I think I had the approach to nuclear weapons that the American public as a whole had, which was this schizophrenic relationship. It was fear and awe, fear of all these things. I mean, my father considered putting a bomb shelter in our backyard. You'd go to the shopping plazas in those days and you could see module fallout shelters that you could buy and put them in. But there's also this awe of the power of the explosion. I mean, every time you saw one of these in a movie or on television, the explosion, you watched it, because there was nothing like this on Earth. So it's this feeling of fear and awe, I think, that's characterized our relationship with nuclear weapons from the beginning. Ploughshares Fund has been around for about 30 years. We raise money from very generous and thoughtful donors, and then we give it away in terms of grants to the brightest people with the best ideas of how to eliminate nuclear weapons. That's our sole focus. This is our only issue, is nuclear policy, and we've given away about $90 million in the last 30 years towards this purpose, and feel that we've got a great return on our investment. We've been responsible for, or in part for, some of the brightest minds of the last couple of generations engaging on these issues and producing policy initiatives that have helped win the negotiation of the CTBT, help win negotiations of reduction treaties, help educate the American public, cut the nuclear weapons budget. I'm very proud to be associated with Ploughshares Fund. I'm been its president now for 4 years. This is the best job I've ever had, with the exception of bartending in Nantucket. That was a pretty good job. In 2009, President Obama, then newly elected, chose his first foreign policy speech to be in Prague on nuclear policy. This was it, not on Iraq, not on Afghanistan, not on relations with China, nuclear policy. This has been one of his pressing issues for years in the Senate. Even as a student at Columbia University, he cared about this policy. He wanted to lead the transformation of U.S. nuclear policy, and he articulated in that speech, I think, a vision that many of us had waited our lifetimes to hear a president say. And he started off in a very fast track with that, but it ran into resistance. It ran into resistance from Russia, who was dragging its heels on negotiating a new treaty, from his political opponents in the United States, and from his ideological opposition in the United States, but also in other countries. And of course, there's the chorus of cynics, the people on the right who say that eliminating nuclear weapons is undesirable, the cynics in the middle who say, well, maybe it's desirable, but it's unachievable, and then there's the cynics on the left who say, well, it's desirable and achievable, but not by these guys. So you run into this cynicism, this fatalism, what Obama called in his speech our deadly adversary, the idea that you can't do this. And that belief, that cynicism tended to grow, the political opposition tended to grow, everything slowed down. Instead of a sprint, it really started to turn into a marathon, and then you hit the presidential election campaign. And in presidential campaigns in 2012, where they actually start more in 2011 now, all national security issues tend to skew right. Especially if you're a Democrat, you start to get protective, you start to hesitate, you can't make the kind of advances you want to make, so the whole enterprise started to grind to a halt. That's why you had an Act 1 of 2009-2010 with great promise, great achievement. The New START Treaty, the Nuclear Security Summit, a new nuclear posture, talks for the first time involving the P5, all 5 permanent members of the Nuclear Security Council, and you saw that progress, stagnate in 2011, 2012, virtually lost years. So you're going to have to wait for the new election to clarify the political agenda and give the next president, if it's President Obama, a third act, another chance at making progress. I think that they're committed to this agenda. From the top down, the president, the vice president, his top staff, I think people in the Pentagon are eager to make changes to this obsolete weapon systems of the past. We'll find out in 2013 if they have a plan for actually doing it. The secret about Obama's nuclear agenda is that it's not really his nuclear agenda. It represents the consensus of America's security elite, of people like Henry Kissinger and Bill Perry and Sam Nunn and George Shultz, but also James Baker and Colin Powell and Brent Scowcroft, people who recognize that nuclear weapons, whatever security benefits they had during the Cold War, are now more dangerous to us. Their liabilities outweigh their benefits, and they want to have a less and less role. It isn't necessarily agreeing that we should get to zero, but it is agreeing that the fewer of these weapons we have, the more secure America is. That's where the American consensus is. Will President Romney swing with that American consensus, or will he try to go back to the Cold War ideas of new weapons and new missions? My hunch is that he swings with the new consensus, particularly as he comes in and he finds out the budget deficit isn't something he can just wish away, that he really has to make tough choices, and he has to make tough defense choices. And when you choose in the 21st century what to fund, you don't fund nuclear. You fund the weapons that you really need to fight the wars, to fight the threats that are actually in front of you. Nuclear weapons have no actual military purpose anymore, if they ever did. And so you can afford to cut these programs back and put your resources where you really need them. And if a Republican president chooses to do that, he actually has greater political ability to do it. The greatest arms control cuts we've had in the past 40 years have been done by Republican presidents. President Reagan was the greatest arms control president of all time, followed by George H.W. Bush, followed by George W. Bush. So that's where your cuts have come from. It's quite possible you might see similar cuts under Romney. Nobody's going to put down a rock in a fight while the other guy's holding a rock. So the only way you're going to do this is everybody does it together. And when you've got lots of rocks, you got to do it stage by stage. So it starts, and everyone recognizes this, including President Obama, it starts with the people with the most rocks, the United States and Russia. They have by far the most nuclear weapons in the world. We went nuclear nuts during the Cold War, building up stockpiles of tens of thousands of weapons each. Well, the good news is both countries are down to thousands of weapons each, but we're the only ones who count our arsenals in thousands. Everybody else counts them in dozens. So there are about 19,000 nuclear weapons in the world. The United States and Russia have about 18,000 between them. So you've got to see them come down step by step. The good news is they are. They are shrinking these arsenals, both for strategic and budgetary reasons. They're coming down, and the trajectory is that they're going to continue to come down through the rest of this decade. Can you keep that? Can you lock that in? Can you make sure that when they get down to, say, 1,000 deployed strategic warheads each, that's locked in, that becomes the new ceiling? Once you get to that level, and we might get there in the next couple of years, well then the other countries who have 200 weapons or 300 weapons, China, Great Britain, France, even people outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty, India, Pakistan, Israel, that's when they start to engage. For two reasons. One, you can't see the US and Russia going much below 1,000 if they think those other countries with a couple hundred will rise up. And the second is, at that point, it really starts becoming in the strategic interest of these other countries to see if they can't negotiate, and if they can't improve their own security by negotiating the reductions of their neighbor's stockpile. India wants to see China's weapons come down, and here's an opportunity to do it. China wants to see India's, etc. You get the picture. So that's when that's when it really goes multilateral, and that's the next step. Can you get down to tens of weapons each in a mutual, verifiable negotiations? That's going to be tough. And no one really knows how to do that, and no one really knows how to take the final step, which is to get down to zero. But as Sam Nunn likes to say, you know, the top of the mountain is in clouds. We can't see it, but we know we have to take steps towards that summit because the precipice is behind us and we don't want to go there. And every step towards the summit, every step of reductions in nuclear weapons, makes it easier to see how you can do it, improves the verification mechanisms, builds up the institutions, builds up the kinds of trust. So it's a step-by-step process. I think it's going to take a couple of decades to actually get to the point where we could box up the final nuclear weapon and put it in a museum, but I do see us getting there step by step. The major reason countries get nuclear weapons is for security. That's why we got them. We thought Hitler was building a bomb. And so top scientists convinced the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, to build a nuclear bomb, not to use it. Who could ever use such a weapon, they thought, but to be able to deter Hitler from using it should he get it. Well, war has a way of taking over, and by the time we actually built the weapon, it became clear that Hitler didn't have one and he was defeated, and we used it anyway. It was a power that we had in our hands and we used it. We haven't used one since, which is kind of interesting. 67 years, and no country has ever used a nuclear weapon despite being faced with enormous military challenges, strategic crises involving the life or death of tens of thousands of troops, sometimes the threat of existence to the existence of the country. Yet we didn't use nuclear weapons. Many, many people now look back on that history and say, you know, nuclear weapons do not have a military utility, and this includes military guys. These weapons factor less and less into plans. When you think that you might have a threat from Iran, or you might have a threat from Pakistan, you don't think, where's my nearest nuclear weapon? You think, where's my aircraft carrier? You think, where's the 82nd Airborne? You think, how can I mobilize the UN Security Council? Nuclear weapons just don't factor into this. So you see it happening, that these weapons are just more and more on the side. In fact, the only thing that really keeps them around is their own inertia, that we built these machines for making nuclear weapons, and they do a very good job, and we haven't quite figured out how to turn them off. So you see the countries that have them, by and large, are starting to marginalize them, and as budgetary pressures decrease defense budgets, you see them also decreasing the nuclear budget. So you see this process happening slowly. New states, very few states are looking at nuclear weapons for their security. There's a couple of exceptions, North Korea and Iran, who again, their primary motivation in seeking nuclear weapons or thinking about what nuclear weapons is protecting them from attack and raising their prestige. And in the case of Iran, you can see domestic politics. It's popular to have the nuclear program. It's a way of building support for an otherwise unpopular regime. Not a weapon, a program, defending their right to a program. But there's very, very few states like that. There's really no one else. So you can see that when you go around the world and you think, what, we have something like 200 countries now, 200 nations, there are only 9 with nuclear weapons. The world is non-nuclear. Entire continents have agreements to be non-nuclear. Africa, South America, more, Southeast Asia. You know, most of the world is non-nuclear. Most of the world has already decided that these weapons are obsolete, that they have no purpose in our life. We're dealing with the Cold War vestiges that have hung over. And as that Cold War slowly fades, as the people who made the Cold War disappear from the stage, you're seeing the weapons themselves and the thinking around these weapons start to shrink. I mean, people say you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That's just not true. That is just not true. You see it happening with nuclear weapons. You see it's already happened with chemical and biological weapons. We put the chemical genie back in the bottle. No civilized nation wants chemical weapons. They're taboo. They're beyond the pale. Same with biological weapons. We all used to have them. Nobody admits to having them now. Very few have them at all. Can the same happen with nuclear? I think it's inevitable. These weapons of mass destruction are accidents of history, accidents of World War I and World War II. We're moving beyond that. We're pushing them away. The National Security Strategy of the United States says that the top threats to the United States are nuclear terrorism and the spread of nuclear weapons. So it's nuclear terrorism. It's not an attack from the Soviet Union. It's not a nation using nuclear weapons. It's nuclear terrorism, a completely different nuclear threat. Requires a completely different solution. Nuclear weapons have zero impact on nuclear terrorism. Nuclear terrorists are undeterrable. They don't have nation states or national futures to defend. So if you're going to defeat nuclear terrorism, you've got to prevent the terrorists from getting the weapon in the first place. And here's the good news. Terrorists can't build a nuclear weapon. They can't make the stuff, the highly enriched uranium or plutonium. That takes a factory, gigawatts of energy, billions of dollars. It takes a nation to build enriched uranium. But if a terrorist can get that material, then the next step, building the actual device, is hard but doable. Delivering it is easier still. Setting it off, there's no shortage of suicide bombers. So Sam Nunn says, again, in his great Southern way, every step in the construction of a bomb is easier for the terrorist to take and harder for us to stop. You've got to stop them from getting that material, and here's where it all comes together. In order to stop a terrorist from getting that material, you need international cooperation. You need the cooperation of not just your NATO nations, but countries like Georgia. You know, through one of the greatest smuggling routes in the world, including materials from the former Soviet Union. You need Vietnam, who's got nuclear reactors for peaceful purposes that use highly enriched uranium. Ghana, Argentina, etc., that have stockpiles of highly enriched uranium for civilian purposes that could be used for a bomb. You need an international consortium. And in order to get that international consortium, you have to convince everyone that this is about getting the world free of nuclear weapons, not just terrorist weapons, all nuclear weapons. So it's those countries with nuclear weapons have to start disarming, including ending nuclear tests, in order to build up the international cooperation you need to convince countries to secure their stockpiles and prevent other states from getting them. And you see that this security, this non-proliferation, is one side of the coin, disarmament is the other side of the coin, and you keep flipping that coin over and over. Creating the security conditions that convince countries they can further disarm, building the international agreements that convince countries to increase security. You just keep flipping that over and over again. That's the current US policy. That's the current global policy, and we're making progress every month, every year. Things are actually getting better, not smoothly, not inevitably, but with the current tools, the current leaders we have, we can see things getting better. Our job is to race to get these agreements, get those materials secured, get a resolution to these crises before something terrible happens. We're in a race to get to the finish line before a catastrophe strikes. There's no question in my mind that the ending nuclear testing, getting all the countries of the world to agree to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is one of the sine qua nons of nuclear disarmament, of non-proliferation. So both. And this is one of the unique values of this treaty. It takes, for the people with nuclear weapons, it limits, it caps how much they can continue to improve their stockpiles, with obvious security benefits for all those countries. And for countries that don't have nuclear weapons, it really is a huge barrier to them ever acquiring them. So it's both a non-proliferation tool and a disarmament tool. And the value of the treaty really relies on what would happen if we didn't get it approved by the United States and China and the other countries that have not yet ratified it. It would send a shock wave through the system. It would start raising the questions about the stability, the validity of the entire system. If the United States is not going to approve the treaty, well, why not? What are they doing? What are they planning? Do they want to do new tests? Are they building new weapons? If China is not going to ratify it, what's going to happen with China's relatively small arsenal? Are they going to expand it? And if so, then everybody has to hedge their bets. Then everybody starts to recalculate. We all thought this was going in one direction. We all looked over the last 20 years and we see weapons going down, 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 down. Wait a minute, maybe there's a shift. Maybe Japan has to rethink. Maybe South Korea has to rethink. Maybe Pakistan has to make more faster. And everything gets shaken up. And so you really start to jeopardize all the progress. And it really is on this treaty. It's on this treaty. People have gotten used to gradual reductions in the US and Russian arsenal. So if the next 4 or 5 years you see more gradual reductions, the system can more or less set up. But if you don't get that treaty ratified, if President Obama doesn't do this in 2013, 2014, if President Romney just wipes it off the table, takes it off the slate, you know, that could be the piece that's removed from the Jenga tower that causes the whole thing to collapse. It's a very, very crucial piece. You want to treat this very carefully, not take it for granted, not think that you could just go on with the thing not in limbo, not approved but signed, being observed but not really moving forward. I think international security systems tell us pretty clearly that historically you're courting disaster. If President Obama is reelected and he wants to continue to pursue his nuclear policy agenda, I don't see how he has any other move but moving to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. It is the piece that he can actually move the quickest. It's not negotiations with the Russians. That's going to take years. It's possibly unilateral reductions, but that's a little risky. It's the treaty. It's right there. It's set up. The case has never been stronger. And for him, it's a personal legacy issue. He said he was going to immediately and aggressively seek the approval of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty back in April 2009. He'll have to remember Chekhov. Chekhov said, if you put a loaded rifle on the wall in Act 1, it better go off in Act 3. Well, President Obama put this thing on the wall. He staked it out. As a re-elected president, he's got to move to try to get this treaty approved by the Senate. I think he'll, as a newly elected president, he will have tremendous political capital to use in 2013, possibly the first half of 2014. That's his window to move. Cutting nuclear weapons, banning nuclear tests have been popular with the American public since the beginning of the nuclear age. When President Kennedy got the limited test ban treaty, he was out stumping on the campaign trail, and every time he mentioned it in one of his speeches, he would get this huge round of applause. And he quipped, if I'd known it was so popular, I would have done it a long time ago. Achieving something like this gives status to a president. It conveys not only leadership, but the ability to secure for America the peace and security of a world with fewer nuclear threats. People like that. They want that. That doesn't mean there aren't political battles to be fought. There is a small group of nuclear Neanderthals in the United States that want to keep nuclear weapons forever, that want more nuclear weapons, that want more nuclear tests, that will go at it tooth and nail about anybody who wants to reduce these weapons. So they're going to be there. They're going to be there whether you do nothing at all. If you just sit there, they're going to attack you. So you might as well engage in that fray, because you can win it and you'll be more popular for it. Well, I'm a student of history. I see the way history is moving, and it is moving against nuclear weapons. It's not as fast as I want, but it's definitely going in that direction. So our role is to bend that arc, is to get that going a little faster, get this achieved, because I'm also very conscious that history changes. You know, and if we don't achieve this, if we don't lock this in, you know, something could happen to reverse the cycle and spiral nuclear danger out of control. So I have that sense of optimism, I have that sense of urgency. I mean, I really do believe what the National Security Strategy of the United States says, that the greatest threat to the existence of the United States is nuclear terrorism or the spread of weapons to other countries, and I want to stop that. So I'm convinced we can do it. I see we have the instruments. And then there's one other reason, which is I don't want to let the other guys win. I don't want to let these nuclear Neanderthals win. They are dead wrong, and I want to beat them. People talk about the optimism of youth, and I was very optimistic as a young man, but it turns out there's the optimism of age. There's just hanging around long enough and seeing what has happened. There's this refrain from a Paul Simon song I keep thinking about. It's an age of miracles. We live in an age of miracles where impossible things happen regularly. Regularly. Things that people said could never, ever happen, like the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Vietnam War, the unification of Germany, the partnership of Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, Nelson Mandela becoming president of a majority-ruled South Africa, or the Red Sox winning the World Series. Things that people said could never happen, and they happen all the time. Barack Obama being elected President of the United States, whatever you think about his politics or his party, that could never happen, and yet it did. So the impossible turns out to be, when people say things are impossible, what they mean is that they're so hard I can't imagine doing them. I can't imagine them happening. Well, some of us can. And you just work at these things, and you work at it all the time, and you work at your entire life, and they happen.